So the University of Bristol's seminal work from 2016 found that the average poverty premium paid by a low-income household was £490 a year. But for more than 1 in 10, it was at least £780. So not an insignificant chunk of change. And also that every low-income household paid a premium. So we know that some protected characteristics are associated with an increased risk of poverty in the UK. So race, disabled people, and sex, especially in the case of single mothers. And although actually pensioner poverty has fallen over the last few decades, younger workers are actually now more likely to be in poverty than other age groups. We also know that COVID has disproportionately affected these groups, both in terms of financial and health impacts. Fair by Design's research found that people with certain protected characteristics are more likely to pay a poverty premium, even when compared with low-income households as a whole, suggesting that the UK marketplace is discriminating against groups of people, albeit indirectly. And the intersectionality plays a big role. So the more protected characteristics a person has, the more risk that they bear. So just very briefly to summarize the poverty premiums and how they correspond to various protected characteristics. To give you an example, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Black people are more likely to live in deprived areas, which leads to a higher insurance premium or simply just going without. And people from Black, Asian, and other racially minoritized communities are more likely to be paying extra costs for their energy. So, for instance, paying on receipt of a bill rather than direct debit, which is usually cheaper. This kind of reflects that these groups are more likely to be in low-paid or insecure work and therefore need more flexible payment methods to help keep control of their finances. So why does the poverty premium exist? Firstly, it's because of a disconnect between policymakers and regulators, and people's lived experiences. So these groups the decision makers tend to rely on consumer research, sort of primarily quantitative data, to inform their decisions. So, for example, the number of people that have switched energy tariffs, rather than people's actual lived experience. And going on from what I'd said before about markets being driven by competition, firms will compete for these engaged customers and compete to cater for them. But what this means is that there isn't a whole segment of the population that isn't served, or they're treated less fairly, or they're excluded. But as far as regulators are concerned, markets are working well because of the lens that they're using, the competition perspective. And this is a cross-cutting theme that goes across all of our target markets. So as such, we need a systemic solution to tackle the root causes of the poverty premium. I would suggest that the poverty premium is really a symptom of an underlying fault with markets. I'll stop for a minute now and let Paulette, an expert by lived experience, share her story. Let's try again. There we go.
So 2 years ago, I was working as a support worker at the time, loving my job. And then I got the devastating news that I had thyroid cancer, which meant I had to stop working. And my whole world changed. Just before I was diagnosed, I had looked at my electricity and said I needed to change it. I had a pay-as-you-go meter, and it was really hard. You know, I was putting in just my electricity alone, sometimes £40 a week, £40 a week on my gas. Because I was paying out more for these things, it meant that other things I just couldn't afford to buy outright. For example, my washing machine broke down and I couldn't afford to pay for it all in one go. So I took it from a catalogue and paid it monthly. And then I found out that had I bought it outright, I would have paid almost twice the price for it. And had I not been on a prepayment meter, I wouldn't have to do that. My friend, who both her and her partner work, so we speak regularly, and she told me how much she pays for her gas and electricity. And when I told her how much I paid for mine, she was really shocked that pay-as-you-go was costing me so much. I feel it's very unfair that they're charging different amounts, because for me, I believe that we're all using the same electricity and we're all using the same gas. Why should one person pay more just because, you know, they have to pay for their electricity or their gas in advance? In fact, for paying for it in advance, you'd think that they should pay less. I had to wait a long time paying as a pay-as-you-go customer until eventually, you know, they trusted me enough to finally give me a credit meter where I pay by direct debits and the bills are cheaper. But during the time when I was paying on a prepayment meter, it was colossal. I think companies are doing a lot more than they used to, but nowhere near enough as they can do. They need to do a lot more. We have the same basic needs. So why is it that if we're utilizing the same resources, why should, you know, somebody who is, you know, in a really vulnerable position pay more?
So what do we think is a solution to the poverty premium? So we need to move upstream to prevent harm occurring in the first place. Inclusive design has been increasingly recognized as a way to ensure markets, products and services are fair and inclusive, especially for people in vulnerable circumstances. It's been referenced by the Financial Conduct Authority and the Competition and Markets Authority, and Ofgem, the energy regulator, have acknowledged it too. But what is it? So inclusive design is the practice of designing products and services to ensure that they are accessible to and usable by as many people as possible. So instead of designing for a mythical average user, sort of determined by quantitative data, you design for all consumers, starting with people with additional or out of the ordinary needs. So doing so not only helps these consumers, but also will lead to solutions that work better for all. So how do you actually put it into practice? How do you design for as many people as possible? Well, we start with people with lived experience, people like Paulette, everyday consumers. So in practice, this means that organizations need to consider and include a wide range of people throughout the design process. They should work directly with these experts by lived experience to identify problems and co-design solutions. They should continuously seek feedback and suggestions from users and potential users and be willing to make a change as a result. So in partnership with Money Advice Trust, we published 2 guides on inclusive design, one aimed at firms and one or companies, and one aimed at regulators. Because if markets are not regulated to serve everybody with overarching policies and guidance to achieve this, it follows that products and services will also not be designed to serve everybody. And in our guides, we have a practical toolkit developed in partnership with the Design Council. It provides a comprehensive walkthrough on how to embed inclusive design in your work, including practical activities to complete with consumers. So Of course, inclusive design can deliver better outcomes for consumers, but as our guide sets out, it can also help firms and regulators too. So for firms, it can help them comply with legal and regulatory requirements, but can also help them commercially, because products and services that are well designed to meet the needs of a range of people will help bring in and retain more customers, and improve the firm's overall reputation. For regulators, it will help them deliver on existing competition and consumer protection objectives. So, for example, work around consumer vulnerability, but also help them demonstrate how they're meeting their obligations under the 2010 Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty. I'll stop talking now, as I know that there are questions and answers, but thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for that, Sohab. Really interesting stuff, and as somebody put in the chat, it is staggering how much the extra cost of being poor is. I mean, I remember when I used to have the put stuff in the meters with my mum, and we had to collect all our 50p's, and just how, yeah. So yeah, so thank you ever so much for that. We're gonna move on. We'll have opportunity for questions to Sohab after the second speaker, and if you want to put comments in the chat, please do so. So I'm just going to Sarah, are you okay to present?
Hello everyone, nice to meet you all. My name's Sarah Turner. I am the Senior Development Worker for Thrive Together Birmingham and one of the facilitators for Birmingham Poverty Truth Commission. I'm going to tell you a bit about Birmingham's Poverty Truth Commission, but before I do, it's worth saying there is a network of poverty truths all around the country. One of the things I love about Poverty Truth Commission is it started in the north. It started in Scotland, in Glasgow, and is working its way down the country, which it's just unusual, I think. And the principle essentially behind a Poverty Truth Commission is you bring together people with lived experience of poverty. You bring those people together alongside people with influence who can shape things, people who make decisions, so that they have a direct relationship with people for whom their decisions affect. Yeah, I'm not sure, many of you will have had some sort of experience of being involved with some sort of commission. That sort of language is kind of common language, I think. My experience of commissions is that they usually involve a group of people with some professional expertise in a particular field. An issue is identified and they are asked to explore that particular issue and make some recommendations. A good commission usually involves some sort of consultation with the people for whom that affects. And usually by the end of that commission, there's a set of recommendations that hopefully at least some of those recommendations carried out into actions. A Poverty Truth Commission is a different sort of commission altogether, in that it tries to turn that traditional model of commission on its head. And it starts with the people with lived experience of poverty. They start by coming together and sharing their experiences with others. And then they invite the professionals, the people with influence, to come and join them for 12 months or so, to explore poverty together and see what they might do together. One of the hardest things to get across about is what's different about a Poverty Truth Commission from other sorts of forms of engagement and consultation. We have a film that we made of our first Poverty Truth Commission, so we are just recruiting for our second commission in Birmingham. But before I go on and say any more, I'm going to let some of my friends from the first Birmingham Poverty Truth Commission tell you a bit about their experiences of Birmingham Poverty Truth Commission. So just give me a minute and I'll find the film and we can watch that together. Is that all right? And I had it all set up, but it's not working. So give me a second. Here we go.
Would people mind just putting themselves on mute? I'm trying to find people, but it's quite difficult to find people who. Thank you. Okay.
What we've tried to do here is create a space where the people that are part of Poverty Truth feel it is their space.
What would happen if people with real life stories of living in poverty were brought together to share their stories with each other?
It's about a group of people coming together, creating a family and trusting, debating, discussing, having a laugh, plenty of tears shed, and trying to make the change.
Every 2 weeks, leaders from across the city sit down with people who are experiencing poverty to hear their stories, learn about what their experience is.
It's done in a different way. It's done in a relationship first way.
It's just real people and real stories, and that makes a real difference, because what we do is we see the person.
What it demonstrates is that they're human experiences. It's everybody's experiences.
Some people, it would never touch their lives. It would never, it's just something that they know is in the background. It's in the newspapers, it's on the news, but they turn that telly off. They throw that newspaper away and they carry on with their day.
Imagine if you come to a bad time in your life and it's like, you've got the housing to think of, if you've got children, you've got the education stuff, you've got even feeding yourself, you come out of work. And the stuff you've got to do, the hoops, you don't even hoops you've got to jump for, you've got to, I don't know, it's just hard, man.
If we don't speak out, no one will hear and then listen to us.
Poverty Truth was presented to us as a way of building relationships between really different sorts of people, with people who'd got real lived experience of poverty in all sorts of different ways, alongside people who have influence and can shape things and make changes.
Just because you drive a nice car and you've got a good job doesn't mean to say that things like mental health, housing issues, education aren't going to impact you at some stage in your life.
So the most important part of work that you do at the very beginning with your testifying commissioners is work on the relationships and getting to know each other a little.
I suppose we talk openly because, it's important. See, none of us have got no agenda here.
This is about talking to real people about their real experiences. And that is so galvanising, is so powerful.
It's a process. A lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different experiences coming together, telling their stories to each other, and then trying to put those stories into a context where we can actually do something about it.
It's far more than just a conversation about people's lives.
This is about human beings meeting human beings.
It's about all our truths.
We are well aware that we can only make little changes, but hopefully those little changes will snowball, and in years to come, hopefully, we'll see some massive changes of policies that we started in this little room.
If we don't try and push doors in a different way, change will definitely not happen.
The Poverty Commission has had a profound effect on me personally, not just in how I work every day, but how I think about everyday life.
One of the things I'll take away is to continue to think about how we impact on people's lives and how decisions are made.
But yeah, I know if I can help someone and I've got the lived experience and someone can look up to me like that, then that'd be nice, you know.
Our agenda is, how do we end poverty in Birmingham? Why can we not develop a 30-year strategy or less to kind of say, actually, we don't want to live in a city where people are poor.
So that's just a little bit of a a little short video about what Poverty Truth Commission is about. And as you can see from that, we would meet together every couple of weeks. One of the things to say is there's kind of two phases to a Poverty Truth Commission. The first phase is the work we do with in the first commission, we call them testifying commissioners. We're calling them community commissioners this time round, but essentially it's people with lived experience of poverty. And the criteria for that is people with a story to tell, who want to tell it. So we're not trying to coerce anybody to be part of something or share experiences they don't want to share. So story to tell, want to tell it, can see that their experiences are similar to other people all around the city. That they're able to recognise that by being part of the commission, it won't necessarily change their experiences, but it might make a difference to other people in the future. So for the first phase of the commission, we bring people together, people that have never met each other from different parts of Birmingham, and we share our experiences together, and it's a really relational process. So we always start with what we call a check-in question, which is an easy question that anybody can answer. Might be things like, what's brought you joy this week, or talking about the things that we like, the TV we like to watch, or the films we like to watch, or the music we like to listen to, because what we're trying to do is create a space where human beings meet human beings. And then we go on to talk about things. So in our first commission, we had 3 theme areas, which were homelessness and housing, child poverty and education, and mental health. So 3 huge issues in and of themselves. And we identified those themes and so told some stories. So at the end of the first phase of the commission, we did an event where we invited about 120 odd people from all around the city, people of influence, people who had been involved in different ways in different areas of Birmingham, to come and hear our commissioners tell their stories in their own words. And at the end of that event, we invited about 15 of them to join us for 12 months, and they became our city leaders, our civic commissioners. And then for about 12-14 months or so, we met together every couple of weeks, and we talked about things together. But we started with we invited everybody to just come in and use their first name. So nobody, the idea is that titles are dropped at the door. You just come as who you are, and you start to build relationships with one another. And then after a few weeks, we begin to really talk about particular issues. So, for example, we had a police officer on our commission, and it was 3 sessions before he told anybody that he was a police officer, because he just wanted to come and be him. So then when we start to talk about issues, so we would start by talking about housing and homelessness. But before we start to talk about the situations that people had found themselves in, we would ask the question, what does home mean to you? And we had people with lived experience of poverty and city leaders really talking about their own personal experiences of home. So then when you start to talk about housing, it's really from a different sort of place, a place that isn't confrontational, because you know the human being, and you begin to understand some of the complexities that housing officers, for example, might have to experience, as well as some of the stories of trying to navigate the really difficult processes. So we did all sorts of little activities together, including things like we made everybody, so all the civic leaders as well, have to make an application to the housing, try and make a housing application, which was very amusing in itself, and having civic leaders going, it's awful, it's terrible, it's so difficult. And so we were able to talk about what that feels like and how frustrating that is. And then you've got people who have some influence, who might actually be able to change things. This was a 12-month process, and along the way of that process, so I could talk about it for a long time, but I won't go into too much detail, but along the way we had a few themed conversations where we then invited other city leaders to join us to talk about housing, to talk about mental health, to talk about well-being in Birmingham, and to talk about education and child poverty. And at the end of the commission, we were able to publish our little report, which isn't full of recommendations, is full of stories, is full of bits of our conversations, and is a challenge to Birmingham about how we might do things a bit differently. So at the end of it, there are some recommendations, but the key thing is that it's about a set of relationships. And I hope that those relationships mean that people are operating differently in their sphere. So how can they change their sphere of influence? How can they make different sorts of decisions? So, for example, one of the civic leaders, one of the conversations I had with him towards the end of the commission was, he was talking about, he worked for the West Midlands Combined Authority, and he would say, I go into meetings now and I think, how will this affect Paddy? How will this affect Liz? How will this affect Mick? Because he has a direct relationship with those people. There's lots of things I could say, but I mean, one of the things I want to sort of finish by saying really is just that if we want to take poverty seriously, we want to really address issues of poverty, then we really do have to take seriously the experiences of those living at the sharp end of poverty. And we've got to do it in a way that sees them as equal and whole participants. I'm going to leave it there, and if you've got any questions, I'm sure Emma will pick them up.
Wonderful, thanks ever so much for that, Sarah. That was yeah, that was great. A lot of things to take in there. And I'm going to encourage people to. We've got a few questions in the chat already, so before I come to you, Sarah, with some of the questions, I'm just going to go to Sohab first, and then if people have got questions for Sohab, if they either put up their hand and Cerise will direct me, or pop something in the chat. So thanks so much, Sohab, around that. That was really interesting. I suppose what I wanted to ask was a lot of the stuff around the poverty premium work is around the consequences of free market economics. So isn't there a case to be saying that actually free market economics doesn't work, and that actually the focus should be on more public services, because in a free market economy, you know, the poverty premium is bound to happen because that's how markets work. How do you kind of respond to that?
Thanks, Emma. So we don't have a position as such on public ownership. However, so thinking about energy, as I know colleagues mentioned it in the chat, something we are advocating for now are social tariffs. Some colleagues, slightly more experienced than me, may remember them existing in a slightly different form than previously. But so essentially what we would support is government intervention. So in the case of social tariffs, actually, energy companies are also calling for government to intervene. So for instance, in the past, social tariffs, one of the reasons perhaps they didn't quite take off was that there wasn't a consistent or a uniform approach. So for instance, in terms of the eligibility or even the cost in itself, what percentage do you set it at? And similarly in insurance, we have some forthcoming research, hopefully published next month with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, which also recommends that government intervene in these markets. So similarly, if we think about how insurance premiums are calculated increasingly as well, there's these new forms of data going into algorithms that kind of churn out this risk score, and we sort of kind of just accept that. But as I sort of touched on in my presentation, this isn't fair, and it's disproportionately affecting people on low incomes. So in this case, we would like for government to, one, really confirm or determine what is an appropriate level of protection or minimum level of protection that a household should have. If we think about car insurance, for example, it's a legal requirement, and yet some research that Fair by Design Commission suggested it's now the biggest contributor to the poverty premium. In some cases, if we add in a monthly payment premium costing nearly £500 extra a year. Now, I don't know about colleagues, but that's almost like my entire car insurance policy cost, not an additional cost. So if we have agreement, or if there is an acceptance that somebody presents a certain level of risk, we need government to also determine then what is an appropriate cost, because right now that the market isn't working.
Thank you. So I have that was really interesting. Sarah, I've just seen you. We've got a few questions for you. So we've got Naomi. Do you want to ask your question, Naomi? Hi, Naomi. Do you want to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, there you go. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Sorry, it was a bit garbled in the message bar. I mean, I just feel so sort of like sort of inspired by what Sarah was saying. Because I mean, I'm actually halfway through a master's degree on development, and there's so much that seems to focus around the fact that nobody listens to the people on the ground, I mean, even on a kind of a global scale, people are trying to impose things on people that are completely unsuitable because they just don't take in what's actually happening on the ground and listen to people and take that on board. But the whole kind of approach of the poverty truth groups just obviously takes out really gets to that and is going to the grassroots level, but just as Sarah encountered any kind of how shall we say, once you get to a certain level, do you find that maybe politicians above a certain level aren't listening? Are they, because I mean the other thing, it's with anything that involves that amount of discussion, it's going to take time, isn't it? It's a big investment of time, people's time from both sides. And to me, certainly national politicians seem to be all about quick fixes and, and obviously advancing their own careers. And, and do you think that you will be listened to beyond a kind of local level? Do you think, and is there any evidence that maybe, what you've done in Birmingham has linked up with other parts of the country? Sorry, there's probably about 10 questions.
I can only talk about sort of local politicians, I suppose, in terms of, so we had the involvement of some of the local councillors on the commission, so came to some of our events. And I mean, interestingly, the local authority liked the process so much that our second commission is actually being paid for, in a sense, has been commissioned by the local council because they see the value of it. And some of that has been because of the involvement of one or two local councillors and senior leaders in the city. I think in terms of sort of politicians nationally, one of the beauties of the Poverty Truth network, national network, is that it is grassroots sort of developing, so that there's this sort of loose movement really of people all around the country who are being part of these Poverty Truth Commissions. And the big, it's growing all the time, and a lot of the same issues are coming up in different parts of the country. So as it grows, the more, I suppose, the more vocal it is able to be, the more evidence we've got of different, of similar but different experiences. And some of the issues, so I mean, we had a big issue around housing, and actually housing is going to be our focal issue for our second commission. But some of the stuff that was an issue around housing, we had a whole big conversation around exempt accommodation and that kind of stuff. There's very little Birmingham local authority can do about that, because that is a national issue, and so that has to be something that is dealt with in a different sort of way. But that's the beauty of the network, I suppose, the national network. So it's both local and, kind of increasingly becoming this sort of national movement. Fred, I don't know if you've got anything you'd want to say on that. Fred, my colleague, who wasn't part of the presentation, but has far more wisdom on some of this than me. So,
yeah, I was going to tell a story of one of our commissioners who actually linked up with SOAB and Fair by Design, because they were looking for testifying people. And bizarrely, she ended up at the Tory party conference telling her story to politicians who, and generally people were like, oh, I've heard it all before, and then she just told her story, which was beguiling, and you could visibly see the change in this politician, this Tory chair of the event, who suddenly went, whoa, hang on, you couldn't do anything about that. That was out of your control. That could happen to anybody. And the whole mood of the room shifted because of that tale. Now, I didn't imagine the Poverty Truth would get to that sort of place. And as a commission, we didn't, but as individuals, and certainly linked with Fair by Design, you get into unlikely places where people can tell their stories, and that's rare. So you just seize them, but we would say she was brilliant.
Excellent. It just seems such an obvious thing to do, to ask the people that experience poverty, but it just doesn't seem to happen, does it? And there are so many barriers and obstacles to getting the message across. I mean, it's great.
Thanks, Naomi. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got thanks for your question. Rachel, I think, wanted to ask something. Rachel Fogler.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I'll just try and be brief. Thank you, Sarah, for that great presentation. I work for a Jewish human rights charity. So the question that I have is about broadly kind of wondering if you can speak to the experience of anybody in the Poverty Commission from a faith background, and how their faith background or participation in a faith community might have affected their willingness to speak their truth. We find in a whole variety of ways that our supporters from, for example, the Jewish community can face what we would call, I guess, extra barriers when it comes to becoming vulnerable in a space. And that's often that, that we're a tight-knit religious community, and, you might go to the shops or pick your kid up from school and see somebody you know. So I'm just wondering if there were any challenges that were kind of overcome or not, particularly pertaining to those participants from faith communities, and anything that you would kind of, that you can impart when it comes to holding that kind of space would be really brilliant. Thank you.
We did have a few people. I mean, interestingly, so it's worth just as a bit of background. So the charity, I work for Thrive Together Birmingham, which our strapline is inspired by faith to tackle poverty and build community. So faith is a big kind of driver, I think, of the way that we're involved. And we're involved with the Near Neighbours as well, which you may or may not have come across with, but which is about people of different faiths building relationships with one another. So we've certainly, as we're recruiting in the second commission, working really hard, because Birmingham was a city of all sorts of different ethnicities and faith groups and that kind of stuff, to kind of get as many different types of people, if you like, involved. I think we had, in our first commission, we had 2 or 3 people who would talk about being people of faith, a couple of people who are from the Muslim faith, one or two people from the Christian faith. In truth, I don't think in the first commission it was a particular barrier, but then trying to get representation, you know, we I suppose we recruited the people that wanted to be involved, and we didn't look very deeply at reasons why people didn't want to be involved, if that makes sense. It's definitely something we're thinking about a lot more deeply as we recruit for the second commission. Fred, I don't know if in terms of your reflections on near neighbours and things like that, whether you have any thoughts on that.
I think I would say, Rachel, that it was interesting that the individuals can tell their stories how they want to, and they didn't choose to present their faith as a barrier. Particularly the Muslim people on it didn't offer that up. They did talk about their faith and how they were seen, but not in terms of, I don't think that came up particularly as a barrier. So you tend to go with the flow of what people offered rather than saying, why don't you talk about this? Does that make sense? Because it's their reality, it's their truth to tell. And if it's not offered as a barrier or an issue, I don't think we explored it.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm just scrolling through some of the comments here. I was just going to go to Adrian's, but I think CISO has responded to that. So, okay. So have we got any more questions for the speakers? Anybody before we? Okay. Well, I just want to thank both of the speakers there and Fred. It's instigated a lot of food for thought for everybody here. So just moving on to the second part of the workshop, which is really about thinking about your calls to action, really, in response to this. This is why we have the Equality Trust workshops. What is it that, and I know a lot of you have been involved, are involved locally. Dan has put something, he's just setting up the Birmingham Equality Group, and really kind of looking at ways about how we as individuals or as groups can get involved around this issue of poverty. So just really referring you to the resources on the Equality Trust website. There is, if you go to groups, there is an activist handbook that you can look through in terms of, and it explores how you can lobby decision makers, create your own local manifesto, or link in with other national campaigns. Some of the campaigns that are involved on poverty at the moment that you might be interested in getting involved with are the Keep the Lifeline campaign, which is there is due to be a cut in universal credit in October, and this will have a massive £20 a week cut on universal credit, which will have a massive impact on people and in poverty. And so there is a very good campaign running by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. If you have there's lots of resources that have templates, MPs templates, and social media stuff if social media is your thing. There's also Challenge Poverty Week between the 11th and 17th of October, and again there'll be a lot of resources around that coming up, so do keep an eye out on that. What I'll do is I'll send out the links to everybody who has signed up to this Eventbrite, so you can have a click on that. And then there's World Homelessness Week coming up in October as well. Okay, so now we're just going to move really, because there's quite a lot of us. We're going to give you an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard in smaller groups. So Cerise is going to put you into small groups just for the next kind of 10-15 minutes. So if you wouldn't mind, when you get into these small groups, if somebody could be brave enough just to introduce themselves, because otherwise you can spend the first minute kind of seeing who's going to introduce themselves, and just a couple of prompts really within your rooms. What do you think about what you've heard? What one action can you think of what you can do from this workshop? And I'll be asking people to put stuff into the chat afterwards. And just a heads up really, to take responsibility to create a comfortable space so that everyone feels able to participate, so that it's not just one person dominating or making other people feel uncomfortable. That'll be brilliant. So if Cerise, if you wouldn't mind, are you there, Cerise? If you wouldn't mind putting people into breakout rooms, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Be for 10 minutes.